if you don't know the nature of fear, if you don't know what fear feels like, then you can never be fearless.
Now, what would you suggest to people who are afraid to fail, how to deal with it?
Yeah. I think one of my first things in failure is don't take it more personally than it actually is. And I'll give an example of that. When I was applying to 40 companies that all rejected me before an interview, all I was getting was an automated response saying your application will not go any further. I can't take that personally because they didn't meet me in person. They didn't have a interaction with me. They just saw my name. They saw I'd been a monk for 3 years. That resume is useless. I mean, what's your transferable skills? Like sitting in silence and stillness. Surprise, surprise, no one wants to hire a monk. And so they rejected you. But that's not personal because they didn't meet me in person.
But what if they had meeting you in person?
Right. So that's the first step. The first step is don't take all failure. I'll give you an example. Me and you, we reach out to countless guests to be on our podcast.
Who say no all the time.
Who say no all the time. But if I don't hear a no from the guest directly, that's not a no. Like someone's team can say no, someone's assistant can say no, someone's PR team can say no. But until they say no personally, it's not a no.
Okay, but when they do say no,
then that's a no. Yeah. So then let's move to that.
So how do you deal with that type of failure?
Yes. So if I deal with a failure where someone meets me in person and gets to know me.
No, Jay, you're horrible. You suck. Like, I don't want to deal with a monk ever in my life. I would never go on your show. I'm never listening to you. Never. Then how do you deal with that type of failure?
I've heard you say this. I've said it a couple of times, and I'm sure it's been repeated a bunch of times around how I genuinely believe failure has feedback.
It's feedback.
And so for me, it's like failure has the ability to actually tell you what you need to improve. Now, not to improve to get their attention, improving to get the actions that you want to take.
The results you want.
The results you want. And don't make that result about the person who said no. Don't try use failure as a way to prove someone else wrong.
Because what happens when we prove others wrong?
When you prove others wrong, you end up trying to get validation and approval for them. And now if they're not impressed when you're right, you lose again. So you end up losing twice.
And you spend all this time and energy, years maybe, to prove someone wrong. I've been there many times. And then you're like, I felt good for a moment. And then I feel empty again.
Totally. And so that's the thing about failure in the second half is you have to see failure as an improvement. If I'm completely honest, everyone who rejected me in my life up until now has made me more hungry, taught me so much more about myself, and made me up my game. And I think if failure doesn't make you up your game, it's the same as losing in a sport, right? When you fail and you've lost games and you've won games, you know, on the big stages.
You didn't have the skills, you didn't have the teamwork, you guys weren't hungry enough,
you weren't communicating enough.
There's something you were missing. So you go review the game film, you check the stats, you see what could I have done better, and you try to improve that for the next game. And I think a lot of people can do that in life, but we're so afraid to like go on the next game.
Fear is a natural reaction to moving closer to the truth.
I guess what I meant by that, I mean, you know, sometimes the mind...
Oh, you're like me. Sometimes I see something and they'll say Oprah Winfrey and I go, did I say that? That made more sense than I thought. Yeah, that's good. But no, that was powerful. Fear is a natural reaction.
And moving closer to the truth. And I think probably partially, anyway, what I meant by that was that fear comes with not knowing what's going to happen.
The unknown.
You don't know what's going to happen next. But fear, in fact, in the Shambhala teachings, I'm part of, you know, the lineage that I'm part of is called Shambhala. And so one of the Shambhala teachings is if you don't know the nature of fear, if you don't know what fear feels like, then you can never be fearless.
The nature of Buddhism, as I understand, is to believe that we are all pure and radiant at our core. And yet we see around us so much evidence that people are not acting out of a sense of purity and radiance. How do we reconcile that?
Well, happiness and suffering, they support each other. They inter-are.
They inter-are.
Inter-are. To be is to inter-be. It's like the left and the right. If the left is not there, the right cannot be there. So the same thing is true with suffering and happiness. And good and evil, they interact also. In every one of us, there are good seeds and there are bad seeds.
And that's just the nature of being human.
Yeah. There is the lotus that grow out of the mud. We need the mud in order to make the lotus. You cannot grow lotus on marble. You have to grow it on the mud.
Mud.
So suffering is the kind of mud that we must be able to use in order to grow the flower of understanding and love.
If I may ask, what do you do when you have some negative thoughts in your head? What is the simplest thing one can do to rid oneself of those negative thoughts, overthinking and negative thoughts?
Negative emotion, you see, mainly related with two things. One, self-centered attitude. I, my, like that. See, that. Then another sort of factor is we accept the reality as appears. The Shunyata, Anatma theory and the Shunyata theory, nothing exists as appears. So since all negative emotion very much based on appearances, so once you realize nothing exists as appears, the wisdom side, Paranja side, Upaya side, altruism, so the antidote of self-centered attitude. So self-centeredness is one factor. And then believe or grasp things as appears. These two things are the basis of negative, destructive emotion.
Mentality that you don't even think about helping and getting out of it. So the reason why the victim mindset, it is real in the sense that there are definitely people in the world that have a harder situation than others. That's fact. There's no debating that point, that there are people who have it are harder than other people. There are people that have had it harder than me, but there are also people that have it easier than me. So I've had it harder than some, and same with you. And in our small bubbles, our hardship feels like the worst thing that could ever happen. And that's the craziest thing about pain, is that you only think pain is bad when you're really going through it. And we compare our pain with other people's pain. We say, oh, that person's pain can't be that bad. That person's pain, it's probably a bit less than mine. You know, because we've never experienced it. So the reason why I encourage people to get out of that mindset is because that's just a one-way ticket to a lifelong commitment to sadness, disappointment, lethargy, complacency, and feeling stuck and lost. There's nothing gained out of feeling sorry for yourself. I don't think there's anyone that I've ever heard say, and I'm open to it, but I've never heard anyone say to me that feeling like a victim my whole life actually helped me find a victory in life. Like, I don't think I've ever heard that. I've never read that in a book. I've never heard it in a documentary. I've never seen it anywhere. So if it's out there, I'm open to it. But when you look at that and you go, is this the life I want to keep living? Do I still want to feel this way? You look at someone like Sindhu Tai, you look at all of these incredible people that have broken barriers. You look at people who were told, Wilma Rudolph was told she would never walk again properly or run at age 9, and went on to be a multiple Olympic gold medalist. When you hear that, you're like, what, really? But that's what's possible. And so no one in the victim mindset has ever seen growth from that mindset. But everyone who has traded that victim mindset for a mindset of acceptance, a mindset of healing, and a mindset of perspective has found their way out. And the mistake we make is we tell people what it's almost like toxic mindset advice, where it's like, oh, stop feeling sorry for yourself, just go out there and do the work. That doesn't work either, because that person needs to accept that they've been through something painful for themselves. So you can't belittle or devalue someone's pain. And often people try and belittle and devalue their own pain to get out of it, but that actually just slows down the process, and then they're back to square one again. So you've got to accept the pain you went through. You've got to accept that you want to heal it.
I spend a lot of time just trying to encourage people that they have the capacity to feel pain or unpleasant feelings or suffering, whatever you want to call it. Just allow yourself to be fully human. Human beings don't just feel good. Have you noticed that? And animals too, you know, we don't just feel good. The richness of life includes the whole tapestry of good and bad and happy and sad. And so, but happy, good, winning, all of that, people don't have too much problem with, you know, but it's, as soon as they even get near something that feels uncomfortable, substance abuse comes from that. All kinds of addictions come from that. I think all violence and domestic violence and about violence to kids and all that, I think it all comes from that. Everyone, that's the sad thing, everyone's trying to feel good and they do terrible things to feel
to make
good.
themselves, everybody trying to make themselves feel good, to quiet the noise that's here that they can't be with.
That's right.
And they reach out externally to do that.
And a big city, a lot of people, but just think oneself, self-centered attitude, and no idea or sense of love. Then, too much competitive sense, then jealousy. Jealousy brings distrust. Distrust brings frustration. So therefore, and fear. Then the lonely feeling automatically comes. So lonely feeling is not creation of environment, but creation of your own mental attitude.
You refer to, I can't remember which book, but you talk about deep listening also.
Deep listening is the kind of listening that can help relieve the suffering of the other person. We can call it compassionate listening. You listen with only one purpose, help him or her to empty his heart. And if you remember that you are helping him or her to suffer less, and then even if he say things full of wrong perceptions, full of bitterness, you are still capable to continue to listen with compassion. Because you know that listening like that, with compassion, you give him or her a chance to suffer less. If you want to help him or her to correct his perception, and then you wait for another time, but for this, the time being, you just listen with compassion and help him or her to suffer less. And 1 hour like that can bring transformation and healing.
So I love this idea of deep listening, because oftentimes when someone comes to you and they want to really vent, they want to purge whatever is going on inside them, people start talking and giving advice. So if you allow the person just to let whatever those feelings are to come out, and then at another time come back to them with your advice or your comments, you would experience a deeper healing. That's what you're saying.
Yes, the fear, the anger, and the despair is born on the ground of wrong perception. And we have wrong perceptions concerning ourselves and the other person. And that is the foundation for conflict and war and violence.
You've said that the only way we can begin to end war is due to communication between people.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And we should be able to say like this: dear friends, dear people, I know that you suffer a lot. I have not understood enough of your difficulties and suffering. It's not our intention to make you suffer more. It is the opposite. So please tell us about your suffering, your difficulties. I'm eager to learn, to understand. It has to start like that, loving speech. And if we are honest, if we are true, they will open their heart and tell us. And then we practice compassionate, deep listening.
God.
That's right.
But I
That's
love this
another way.
idea of when you see something going on with another person, and even if you're just stuck in traffic and you're getting upset with them, you do the just like me exercise. Can
That's
you share
right.
that? I like that.
Well, it's really helpful. You can do it anytime. Like, for instance, sitting and waiting, for anything. You can just look around at people and whether they seem stressed or happy or whatever, you can say, just like me, we are alike. Just like me, that person really wants to be loved. That person doesn't want to suffer. That person doesn't want physical pain. That person doesn't want hatred coming towards them.
Right, just like
that
me.
person, just like me, just like me. But so it's very, very useful if, like, you're in these irritating situations like a traffic jam. It's so.
Or at the airports. People get so frustrated at the airport.
Oh, I know. So you sit there and you just start, instead of fuming, which gets you nowhere except,
More fuming.
More fuming. You start looking at the people in the other cars or other people sitting in the airport or everything. And just like me, these people had someplace to go and they're being delayed. And just like me, they're fretting about it. And just like me, they're just human beings who
want to be where they are trying to get to.
And just like me, it would really be helpful if there was some other way they could deal with it,
Yes.
So here's some advice.
Yes.
The advice would be just start seeing the humanity of all the people in the cars around you.
I would have to.
It's weird the way it sounds, but becoming a monk was my biggest dream growing up. From that time period that I met the monk at 18, which we spoke about the last time I was here. And so that became like my identity from 18 to 22 and then 22 to 25 when I lived as a monk. So it's like that's been my identity for 7 years, at least in my heart and my head. And so when you get to the end of a self-awareness journey, which is actually the beginning, but you get to the end of it because you're like, oh, I'm not a monk anymore. And I'm sure you've gone through similar things like, oh, I'm not a CEO anymore of this, right? Of a business that does this. Or someone else may go through, I'm not married anymore. I'm now divorced. I am now not single anymore, or I'm not alone. I've got kids, right? It's like we all go through these identity transitions in our life. And to me, going from being a monk to not being a monk was the hardest transition that I'd been through at that time. And the question that I'm having is, I'm having reflections on who I truly am and what my skills are, what my strengths are, what my passion is, what my compassion is. And I'm saying, I want to share all of this in like a cool way through entertainment. And I love movies, and that's why the book's full of like pop culture references. And it's who I am and what I love about myself. And then I'm going, but this doesn't align with what monk life is meant to be in a sacred way. And that is like looking in the mirror and going, oh, like I'm not comfortable with that. So when I share that with my teacher and we're having this discussion, his advice, and I think this is the part that you're referring to, he says to me that there's students that come to university and then they become professors, and there are students that come to the university and then they go out and become entrepreneurs or go out and work. And he says, which do you think are better? I'm like, I mean, neither really. Like, I can't really choose what makes someone better. And he was just like, that's the point. You came here. Some people stay at the monastery and go on to become senior monks and teachers. And some people will go out and do what they do outside. And he goes, but neither is better. And it was the simplest advice. It's one of those pieces of advice that it's all about the person that says it and not necessarily what you're hearing. But for me, it just clarified the judgment I had, the attachment I had, that I could only be happy and purposeful in this way. And that's really what we're all struggling with, that currently we all have a projector screen up here that goes, this is what life's meant to look like for it to be happy. And then down here, we have the reality version of what life actually looks like. And we go, oh no, they don't match. That doesn't match. That's not working. That means I'm going in the wrong direction. The funny thing is, the version you have doesn't exist at all. It's just an imagination. It's virtual reality. And the reality that you're experiencing could actually be getting you closer to that goal than you even think, but you just don't want to go down that path because it doesn't look like the one you imagine.